Hello, I'd like to spend this time now talking about plant production and how to determine plant production for the different species and then how we use that. There are three different methods basically to determine plant production. Estimating, and we estimate using weight units. Double sampling, which is an approach that combines the estimation with the third approach, which is total harvesting. Those are the three methods that in the Natural Resources Conservation Service we use. They're well described in the National Range and Pasture Handbook, as well as in the monitoring manual that Jeff Herrick talked about earlier. We strongly recommend using double sampling because it combines the efficiency of the estimation, the speed of estimation, but adds some accuracy of the harvesting method. So I think I will start with demonstrating some of the double sampling techniques and how we go about doing that and what we recommend doing. This tape is set up very much like any tape might be for any kind of a transect to be run. This one happens to match the NRI protocol. NRI protocol requires that the first frame be set up at 12.5 feet from the beginning of the transect, and this one is set up that way with the corner at 12.5 feet, starting at the beginning of the transect going this way. Any approach that might be used to space the frames from one location to another depends a lot on why you're gathering this information. As I said, in NRI, that's set, and those protocols are set nationwide, and we don't deviate from that. For other protocols, you might set different spacings. If you were doing an inventory out here to characterize this particular ecological site, the spacing of the frames that you use would be determined by the size and shape of that site that you're trying to characterize. In other words, you want to collect enough samples spaced out along the extent of the ecological site to be able to get a picture of the variability in the site. For this demonstration today, we'll just use this frame right here, and you notice that it is 9.6 square feet in area. That's the size of the frame that is used most commonly in arid and semi-arid parts of the country. Strongly recommend using a 9.6 square foot frame. As you move to wetter parts of the country or parts of the country where the precipitation is a little less variable, the frame sizes can be reduced. Other common sizes would be 4.8 square feet, 1.9 or 0.92 square feet. There's a good description of those in the National Range and Pasture Handbook that also give the conversion factors to convert weight collected in grams out of these frames into pounds per acre and how to do that. So with that, let's look at this frame and see what we have in here. We'll get down so we can look at what's in this frame. There's 3 or 4 different species here. The most prominent one, the most obvious one, is black grama. I'll probably talk about or use common names as I go through this. As you record, again, depending on the purpose of your inventory and why you're doing this, you may record in common names, you may record in scientific names, you may record using the plant symbols. Whatever it is, depending on why you're doing this, you need to be consistent throughout the process. So in this inventory out here, if it was, for instance, for conservation planning, you might use common names. If it is for NRI, what will be entered will be the symbol code for the species. But remember to be consistent in whatever method you might choose. If you don't know what a plant is, when you record it, there are some symbols that you can use. Unknown grass number 1, unknown forb number 1, whatever it might be. Remember to be consistent and call your unknown forb number 1 the same thing in this frame and the next frame and the next frame. And so that unknown forb number 1 is always the same species. So as you go through and identify the plants, get a good list of the plants that are out here. Write those down on your data sheet. And then look around the area. If you haven't already developed a weight unit for those particular species, you need to look around the area and determine kind of what the average size of those plants are. Determining a weight unit and the size of that weight unit is real important in the double sampling technique. It's important for several reasons, mostly consistency. Making sure that you can be consistent in identifying how much of a plant weighs what amount of grams is real important in being able to be consistent when you begin then to use the estimation part of the double sampling procedure to help you gather this information. If we look at the black grama here and we look at this size and the shape, the way this is growing, these are nice, big, robust plants this year. Select something that weight unit that is a size that's easy to recognize and easy to remember. There are several different kinds of thought processes you can go through to determine the weight unit. Some folks like to clip until they get something that weighs 5 grams or 10 grams or 15 grams, whatever might be an easy number to remember. Some people tend to go more towards size of the weight unit. Personally, I prefer to look at the size. It's easier for me to remember my weight unit on black grama is this big. I can write down how much it weighs and I don't have to remember how much it weighs. But it's hard for me to write down this big, but I can remember this big. Black grama, and I think for the black grama out here, something that'll work real well is to put my fingers together like this, and that much will be my weight unit on black grama. So I come outside the plot, come over here where there's some black grama, find some that I can get that much. Actually, that was really pretty good. Clip that, separate out as best you can, separate out the old growth from the current year's growth. This is, we're out here the end of February, so we're looking at last year's growth. It's a little more difficult to separate sometimes 2-year-old growth from 1-year-old growth when you're at this time of year. The information that we're after in this particular protocol is to get annual production. If total above ground biomass was something that you were looking at rather than annual production, then you wouldn't be as concerned about separating out old growth. And that would be the difference between biomass and production kind of numbers. For this exercise today, we're looking at production. Particularly this time of year, color is a good key. The difference in the color of the old growth is a good key to separate last year's from year before. As with most things, there are better times of year to do this than others. This is probably approaching the worst time of year to do it. The best time of year would be the day after the end of the growing season. If you could predict that, that would be the day to get out there. Take this sample and put it in a paper bag. Have a set of gram scales. weighs 502 grams, 52 grams. 52 grams. And the weight of the bag is 6 grams. That's a 6-gram bag, 52 grams of material. So my my weight unit weighs 46 grams. Is what Black Grandma weight unit weighs. Then you do the same thing for all the plants that are out there. Desert holly. The clip was 2 stems of desert holly, and I don't know, let's see if that'll even weigh anything. Say 9 grams. So 2 stems of desert holly weighed 3 grams. And I'm going to write myself a note that that was 2 stems. Now it's time to come to the frame and count the number of weight units that you see inside the frame. So we'll start with the Black Grandma. Remember, the Black Grandma weight unit is about this size. So we try to figure out try to count how many of those we have in the frame. There's 1. 2. 3. 3.5 weight units of Black Grandma here in the frame. Remember that as you go through and count these weight units, you need to look also at places like this where there's some that has been utilized by rabbits or livestock or whatever might be the case, and that has to be included in the count as well. They're not always this size, so the ones that are this size you have to amalgamate into a weight unit this size. The ones that are this size you have to separate into weight units this size. So 3.5 weight units of Black Grandma. I'll write that on the data sheet. And then go to the next species. Remember the desert holly, we had 2 stems worth were a weight unit. So with a plant like desert holly that usually is a single stem kind of a plant, it's real easy then just to count those stems. And there's 1, 2, 3, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 18 stems of desert holly. So that gives me 9 weight units. Again, remember the weight unit was 2 stems. So 9 weight units is written down there. Then you go to the next species on your list and the next species on the list until you get them all counted and estimated. That's the estimation part of double sampling. That's the part that can really go fast once you learn the weight units. And again, the key to doing this is getting the right size weight unit. Something that you can recognize quickly and easily, and something that you can be consistent when you, size-wise, when you begin to count them in the frame. One of the things that I should have mentioned as I went through, you may have noticed that I was trying to determine in some places what was inside and what was outside the frame. Again, be consistent in those determinations. The National Range and Pasture Handbook states that if it's rooted in the frame, it's in the frame, whether the canopy comes outside the frame or not. If it's rooted outside the frame, then it's outside the frame, even if the canopy is inside the frame. So this, for example, this grass plant right here, if all of the production, all of the growth were actually hanging over the frame, it would not be counted because it's rooted outside the frame. So if it's out, it's all out. If it's in, it's all in. You don't try to clip the amount that's hanging over the frame. It's not a cylinder. It's what's in the square feet footage of the frame, rooted in the frame. So that's the estimation part. The next step then would be to pick up the frame and go to the next location that you are going to sample. But with the double sampling technique, you may want to come back to this frame and clip it to correct your estimates. So before you pick the frame up, take some flags and put some flags in the corner of the frame. Square frame really works well, or rectangular frame really works well for that. Round frames don't have real good corners. So if you're using a round frame, use at least 3 flags and space them about 1/3 around that circle, so you can come back if this is a plot that you choose to clip and put the frame back in the same place, so you're clipping the same frame. We've talked about the herbaceous plants. There were no woody plants in this frame. They were all herbaceous. Had there been some woody plants in this frame, I would not have counted them in this 9.6 square foot frame. They will be counted in an expanded plot. It's recommended that expanded plots be used to collect production information or biomass information on woody plants. It's a better sampling technique than a small frame. We recommend that expanded plot be at least 1/100th of an acre in size. If you expand the plot square, that's about 20.8 feet on a side. So we'll move now into talking about that expanded plot. After we estimate all the production of the herbaceous species in the 9.6 square foot plot, we expand the plot to get the production on the woody species. And again, that expanded plot that we're recommending today is 1/100th of an acre. We used a 20.8 foot square and put the flags along the edge of that 20.8 foot square so we can look at the woody species in that plot. Again, just like with the 9.6 square foot plot, first thing you need to do is walk around and identify the plants that are in the plot. The only woodies that we have in here today is creosote bush. Creosote bush is an evergreen shrub that grows here. It's the only woody that's in the plot. Look around the area and look at the size of the creosote bush. Just like with the herbaceous plants, you want to pick a weight unit that is representative of the size of the plants that are growing on the site. This would be my weight unit, and just like with the herbaceous plants, you would clip all of the annual production off of this plant. And on creosote bush, it's an evergreen. It doesn't lose its leaves annually, so one of the things you have to know is how often do the leaves fall on a creosote bush plant. Creosote bush loses about 2/3 of its leaves a year. So the oldest leaf on this plant is probably 18 months old at any given time. So about 2/3 of the leaves on this plant are current season or year production. If you look at the branch on the plant, you can see the coloration difference as the branches branch off of the main stems. That's where the vast majority of the leaves are. A good method to determine the annual production on creosote bush actually would be to pick all of the green stems off of the main stem, put them in a bag to weigh them. And then when you get all of the green stems picked off, you would also come back and pick off, pick off all of the other leaves that were on the plant, and then take 2/3 of that weight, and that should give you the annual production for creosote bush. Just like with the herbaceous plants, there's no difference in the woodies, except that woody plants that are evergreen, you need to be able to determine what that turnover is on the leaves, so that you can get the correct amount of annual production for the leaves. Another thing that is especially important, regardless of the time of the year, on creosote bush today, unlike the herbaceous, the moisture content on the creosote bush is going to be higher. It's going to be much different. The herbaceous plants were basically air dry. The creosote bush will have some moisture in them. That's one of the correction factors that we'll talk about a little while later. And it's also, you can weigh them in the field, take them in and dry them and reweigh them to get dry weight. So after you determine what size your weight unit is going to be, you're happy with the weight unit, there's a couple of steps that you can do. You can clip your weight unit to get that weight. I like to first, before I do that, because that does take quite a lot of time on a shrub this size, I like to go ahead and determine how many weight units I have in my frame, or in my expanded plot. So that's what I'm going to do now. This is my weight unit. There's another plant over here. So we look through the frame, or the expanded plot, we see that there's another creosote bush right here. It's really close to this line. If we follow the line of the yellow flags, we see that it overlaps the expanded plot. This branch is actually outside the plot, but the plant itself is rooted in the plot. So the entire plot will be, the entire plant will be counted and considered to be in the plot. So the next thing that needs to be considered is how big this is in relation to our weight unit. This is a particularly small creosote bush. It's much smaller than just about any of the other ones out here today. And I would estimate that looking at the density of the foliage, the amount of foliage, the amount of growth, the length of the green stems that are on here, and the density of the foliage compared with the weight unit, and the size compared to the weight unit, that this is probably 25% or a quarter of a weight unit. So far in our plot we have 1.25 weight units. As I look around the plot, there is another plant over here that I'll go look at. Here is the other creosote bush that I looked at and looked like it might be in the plot. And as I get over here and look at it and see where it's positioned along the line of the expanded plot, I notice that the canopy overlaps into the plot, but the crown of the plant itself is actually outside the plot boundary. So this plant is not counted as a plant in the plot, and its production does not go into the plot production. So we have two plants in this expanded plot. We have the plant that I used for a weight unit over here, and we have the small plant over there that was basically 25% of a weight unit. So I will clip that weight unit, and the production on that weight unit will be then multiplied times 1.25 for the production in this plot. The next expanded plot that I go to, that is still my weight unit, and I'll have that weight already clipped. So we have estimated the weight of the herbaceous plants in the 9.6 square foot frame. We've estimated the number of woody plants here in the expanded plot, the 100th acre plot. Had there been more than one species of woody plant, we would have done the same thing with that second species as well, as what we did with the creosote bush. The process is the same for herbaceous and woody. The plot size is the only thing that changes, and then the need to know what the leaf cycle is on an evergreen plant, so that we can determine that annual production. So for plot number 1 here, we have completed the estimation part. It's now time to pick the frame up. Remember, I put the flag so I could come back and clip that if we decided it was one to be clipped. I'll pick my frame up and go to plot number 2 and repeat the sequence then with plot number 2 by estimating weight units in plot number 2. If when I put my plot down for the second place, I find a species in there that I had not found in the first plot, then I go through the same process of determining a weight unit, size, and weight for that new species. I don't need to determine weight units all over again for black grama. I've done that. The black grama weight unit was this size, so I don't need to clip weight units for black grama again. What I need to do when I get to plot number 2 is just count the weight units of black grama, count the weight units of sand drop seed, count the weight units of desert holly. So I'll go get my frame and move to the next location. We've estimated all our frames this morning, and after all of them were estimated, we looked to see how many different species were in each one of the frames and how much of each species was in each of the frames to help us decide which of the frames we needed to come back and clip to help adjust our estimates with. It's recommended strongly that you estimate all of the frames that you're going to estimate first. Use those estimates to determine which one of the frames or which ones of the frames you want to come back and clip and how many of those frames you want to come back and clip. The idea being you want to clip every species if possible, and you want to clip the major species more than once, so that you get a good average of the clipped weights in each of the frames to help adjust your estimated weight. And again, always estimate all the frames first and then come back and clip. That's the easiest and best way to train your eye and teach yourself to be able to do the estimation method without the double sampling. Once you're double sampling, your clipped weights and your estimated weights match closely, then you don't have to do the clipping or the double sampling as often. Would do it still regularly to make sure that your eye is still trained and you're still consistent, but you don't have to do the clipping nearly as often. That's the good part about the double sampling. It allows you to collect the data relatively quickly, and it also allows you to train your eye to the estimation. So when we looked at the data that we collected in the frames we estimated, we determined that plot number 1 was one of the plots that we wanted to come back and clip. You remember that I placed flags in these two corners, and this flag was at the outside corner of the frame. So now I know where to come and put this frame back in place. Okay. Now the frame is back in place where it was, so we have the same plants in the frame that we had before. The next thing we want to do then is to begin the clipping process. Black grama was the dominant plant in this frame. Black grama is the dominant plant on this site, so it will be clipped in all of the plots that are clipped for double sampling. Again, what we're after, the measure that we're after here is annual production. So clip it to the ground. Again, separate out the obviously dead old material that wasn't last year's production. Color again is a good estimator of that, a good way to separate that out. Some plants that really works well, some it's a little more difficult. Get all the litter out of the base. Put it in the bag. I'm going to take these bags back, and many times it's a good idea to take the bags back and dry them. Weigh them here in the field, record that weight, take them back and dry them. So you be sure and get the dry weights. That looks like that's all the black grama in the plot. As I go to the next species and begin to clip the next species, undoubtedly I'll find some more black grama. So as you do that, clip the black grama separate, put it in the black grama bag. Don't put it in the sand drop seed bag or the desert holly bag. Keep them separate. Weigh the bags, record your field weight, take them in and dry them if you need to. It's always a good thing to do. It's a good exercise to do. It really helps you train your eye to the different species and how much the different species weigh, because they do weigh quite differently. So with that, we'll move to the next species. Sometimes it's difficult to identify all of the species in the plot the first time around. So came back, I began to do the clipping, and as I got through sorting, clipping by species and sorting everything out into different bags, I discovered that there was a broom snakeweed that I did not see the first time through. So so I estimated broom snakeweed, just like I was in some of the other plots. I had a broom snakeweed weight unit, so I estimated the number of weight units, counted the number of weight units of broom snakeweed in the plot, clipped it. We'll put it in a bag and take it back. I'm going to take all of these back and weigh them just for the exercise. It's always a good thing to do. So do that, and don't forget to write down what the plant is that's in the bag. That's always helpful. You might notice also that this is awful clean. It's not just the standing vegetation that's gone, but also the litter. I picked up the litter in this plot. You can take the litter back or weigh the litter as well and get a weight for the amount of litter that was in this 9.6 square foot area as well. That is in some protocols, and some protocols it isn't. And as Jeff has indicated in the introductory piece to all of these videos, it's important to match your inventory and your monitoring data collection to the needs. So collect the data you need to collect to answer the questions that are being asked. And if there is a question about litter that pertains to litter cover, litter amount, those sorts of things, then litter can be included in this sampling protocol as well. The litter can be picked up and put in a bag and taken back and weighed as well. So that's what I've done with this. I will put these in my backpack and take them back and weigh them. One of the things I mentioned earlier was the fact that this was a pretty rough time of the year to come and make these estimations and do this sampling for annual production. The best time of year to do it is right immediately following the growing season. You know, if you were out here the morning after the first frost, hard frost, that would be more ideal. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. And so a lot of what we have to do when we do this estimation and double sampling is reconstruct what we see based on things like where we are in the growth curve of the plant, what kind of year it was, growing year it was, the temperature precipitation combination, have the plants been utilized by grazing animals? Those are the kinds of factors that go into adjusting the weights that are estimated and clipped to come up with a total annual production.